My name is Samira, and I'm 24 years old. For most of my life, I believed that the happiest day I would ever experience would be my wedding day, the moment when everything I had dreamed about would finally come true. But a week before my wedding, something happened that completely turned my world upside down. I later discovered that my own mother had secretly cancelled every single wedding vendor behind my back. The flowers, the catering, even the venue itself. At first, I had no idea. Everything seemed completely normal on the surface. I was living in that dreamy bubble every bride knows, the one filled with color palettes, seating charts, dress fittings, and late-night calls with my fiancé Amir about the future we were about to start together. We had been planning the wedding for almost a year. 200 guests were invited. The venue was a beautiful garden lot just outside the city, surrounded by tall white arches and rows of cherry blossom trees that were supposed to be in full bloom during the week of our ceremony. The florist had promised soft pink arrangements everywhere. The caterer had designed a menu inspired by dishes my dad used to love before he passed away. Every detail of the wedding felt deeply personal. My mom had been involved in the planning from the very beginning, which at the time felt incredibly sweet. She insisted on helping with phone calls, appointments, and payments, saying she wanted to make sure her only daughter had the perfect wedding. Looking back now, that's exactly how she gained control of everything. About 10 days before the wedding, small and strange things started happening. My florist stopped replying to my messages. The catering manager suddenly said he needed to confirm something later. When I called the venue coordinator, she sounded oddly hesitant, like she was avoiding saying something directly. At the time, I assumed it was just normal wedding chaos. Amir even told me not to stress, explaining that vendors often get overwhelmed during wedding season. I wanted to believe him. But 3 days later, while I was sitting at home finalizing the seating chart, my maid of honor Lena walked in looking pale. She had her laptop open and spoke quietly. "Samir, I think something is wrong." My stomach dropped before she even finished her sentence. She turned the screen toward me and showed an email chain between the venue coordinator and someone using my mother's name. The message said that the wedding had been cancelled by the bride's family and that all services were no longer required. At first, I actually laughed. It sounded ridiculous. My mom wouldn't do something like that. She had been the one pushing me to make the wedding bigger, inviting distant relatives and proudly telling everyone about it. But Lena kept scrolling. More emails appeared. The florist confirming cancellation. The catering company acknowledging termination of the contract. Vendor after vendor confirming the same thing. Every message ended with the same polite line. As requested by the bride's mother. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called my mom immediately. When she answered, she sounded calm, almost cheerful. I asked her directly if she had cancelled anything related to my wedding. There was a long pause on the line, the kind that feels louder than words. Then she sighed and said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. She told me she had done it because she was saving me from ruining my future. Confused and hurt, I demanded an explanation. That's when she admitted something even worse. She said she had spoken privately with Amir a few days earlier and told him, "My daughter is damaged goods, and you're making the biggest mistake of your life." Hearing those words felt like someone had punched the air out of my lungs. My own mother had said that about me. I didn't even understand why. She refused to properly explain, only repeating that she was trying to stop the marriage before it was too late. I hung up the phone feeling completely numb, like my brain couldn't process what had just happened. The next morning, I started calling every vendor myself, hoping there had been some misunderstanding. But one by one, they all confirmed the same thing. The wedding had been cancelled nearly a week earlier. Deposits were gone. Bookings had been released. The celebration I had spent months planning had disappeared through a series of quiet phone calls I knew nothing about. All I could imagine was the nightmare scenario getting closer by the minute. 200 guests arriving on our wedding day and finding nothing but an empty lot. I truly believed everything was over. I thought my mother had destroyed the most important day of my life. What I didn't realize yet was that someone else had already discovered what she had done. And that person had secretly been preparing something for 6 months. For the rest of that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by wedding binders, contracts, and decorations that suddenly felt meaningless. Every plan I had spent months building was gone. The venue was cancelled. The flowers were gone. The caterer had already given my date to another event. The same terrifying image kept replaying in my mind. 200 guests arriving and finding nothing. The humiliation alone made my chest tighten. Relatives whispering. Amir's family wondering what kind of chaos they were marrying into. And the worst part was still those words. My daughter is damaged goods. They echoed in my head like a cruel recording I couldn't turn off. Later that night, Amir came over after finishing work. I expected him to look distant, maybe even unsure after everything my mom had said to him. Instead, he walked straight into the apartment, sat beside me, and pulled me into a tight hug before I could even speak. When I asked what my mom had told him, he admitted she had shared personal things from my past, twisting them into something ugly and warning him that marrying me would ruin his future. But Amir said he simply listened and then told her one thing. I'm marrying Samira because I love her, not because I expect perfection. Hearing that made tears finally fill my eyes. But love alone couldn't magically restore a cancelled wedding. I told him maybe we should postpone everything. That's when Lena, my maid of honor, cleared her throat from the corner of the room with a strange smile on her face. She had been unusually quiet all evening. Then she said something that completely confused me. She reminded me of something people would later read online. My maid of honor had been secretly planning something for 6 months. I stared at her in disbelief. 6 months? Planning what? She closed her laptop slowly and explained that she had suspected something like this might happen long before the cancellations. My mom had always been controlling, always trying to shape my life the way she wanted it. During the early stages of wedding planning, Lena noticed how aggressively my mom tried to control vendors and finances. Something about it made her uneasy. So quietly, without telling anyone, not even me, she started building a backup plan. She had reserved a small private vineyard outside the city months ago under her own name. It wasn't the large garden venue I had originally chosen, but it was beautiful and intimate. She had also stayed in contact with a second catering company that happened to have an open schedule that weekend. A photographer friend owed her a favor. Even decorations could be replaced with simple lights and flowers from a local supplier. I could barely process what she was saying. When I asked why she hadn't told me earlier, she simply shrugged and said she didn't want to worry me unless the worst actually happened. And now, it had. For the next 2 days, we worked like a team planning a secret mission. Calls were made. Deliveries arranged. Amir's family immediately stepped in to help. My cousins volunteered to decorate the vineyard themselves. Guests were quietly redirected to the new location through messages and emails. Slowly, the despair I had felt began to transform into something unexpected. Hope. My mother believed she had destroyed the wedding completely. She had no idea that another one was quietly being rebuilt somewhere else. Finally, the day arrived. The original venue, the empty lot my mother had cancelled, remained silent and unused. But across town, at the vineyard Lena had reserved months earlier, fairy lights glowed between rows of grapevines. Long wooden tables were covered with soft white cloth. Music floated through the warm evening air. One by one, our 200 guests arrived. Not to an empty disaster, but to a celebration that somehow felt even more magical than the original plan. And then something happened that none of us expected. My mother showed up. Apparently, she had heard from a relative that the wedding was still happening somewhere. She walked into the vineyard looking confident, probably expecting chaos or embarrassment. Instead, she stepped into a glowing celebration filled with laughter, music, and cheers as Amir and I stood together under a simple wooden arch. I will never forget the look on her face. Shock. Confusion. Silence. She had spent an entire week destroying everything behind my back, believing she had stopped the wedding completely. Yet there she was, standing in the middle of a celebration she no longer controlled and could not stop. In that moment, I realized something important. The people who truly loved me had built something stronger than her sabotage. The ceremony continued. Our vows were spoken. And when the crowd erupted into applause, my mother stood there speechless, surrounded by proof that her plan had failed. That night, as Amir and I shared our first dance beneath the vineyard lights, I finally understood something about family. Family isn't defined by the people who try to control your life. It's defined by the people who stand beside you when everything falls apart.